with another guest, Bethan Walters. How are you today?
I'm well, thank you. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. So, just to begin, can you tell our listeners a bit about yourself?
Yeah, for sure. So currently I am and for the last 2.5 years been working for an NGO with UN consultative status. So the NGO is called the Sikh Human Rights Group. I'm not Sikh myself, but the kind of overall concept of the organization isn't to change everyone and become Sikh, but rather to kind of encourage more of a pluralistic and more of a pluralistic outlook on life rather than a universalistic. So if you look at the United Nations, for instance, a lot of the legislation, a lot of the ways we speak about any issue, particularly, for instance, climate change, we come at it as a very kind of countries with a higher GDP, they're the ones who determine basically what is decided, how we approach these issues. In quotes, these kind of Western culture countries are the ones who decide things. So, like an example of how that's not really going to change how we, I guess, look at the world and try and save our planet is, if you looked or spoke to someone in Punjab, who is Sikh and he had never lived anywhere else, and so that was what he was surrounded by was, again, his concept of death. If you said to him in 10 years time you're going to die because of climate change unless you change how you kind of react with the planet, well, his concept of death is that's my karma, and that he'd accept that, and that would be a matter of like that's not really a threat to him, whereas my concept of death is very literal. So actually using that language with me would make me change. So overall, that's kind of what the NGO does. But we've been quite fortunate to have stances on lots of stuff. So when I started, we did a lot of work on the farmers' protests. And then I've been fortunate to kind of lead a lot on our diversity project, trying to push a declaration on diversity through the United Nations. So again, more of a rights-based approach, rather than, this kind of constant conversation around tolerating one another. It's a matter of actually celebrating people's differences and recognizing how much you gain from that, recognizing if you steer away from the hegemony, you really do benefit so much more, like you only benefit from it. But yeah, the biggest project I've been working on over the last about year and a half is more of our kind of menstrual health and empowerment project, which has been really rewarding. And I was kind of more interested in that. I've been teaching yoga for about 8 years, and I've done like my PT and exercise to music qualifications about 10 years ago for the exercise to music, and then it was about 5 or 6 years ago for my PT. So I've always been interested in there's the fitness side to it, but also just kind of how your body reacts to different things, and kind of being a bit more in tune with your body, and then actually how you can use that to really bolster how you just adapt your day-to-day life. And then again, working in human rights is obviously a bit more limiting financially. So I've also worked as a social media manager for the last 2.5 years with a woman called Lisa Henderson Jack, who's based in Canada, but her Instagram account is Fertility Friday. And with that, it's not to, shame any birth control pill, but it's to spread education around, first of all, the power of your menstruation. How her book is called The Fifth Vital Sign. So her concept is your menstrual cycle is your fifth vital sign. There's controversial whether people see it's your fifth, or maybe pain is your fifth vital sign. But the point is, whether it's your fifth, whether it's your sixth, it is actually a vital sign. You learn so much about your body if you just have a bit more understanding on your menstruation. So her kind of biggest seller is kind of really trying to help menstruators track their cycle so that they can either use fertility awareness, so where you would take your temperature, you would check your cervical mucus, and potentially check the positioning of your cervix every day, to make sure, okay, this is when I'm fertile, this is my fertile window. If I do want to get pregnant, this is when I should be doing it. If I don't, this is when either maybe I use a barrier method, or maybe I withdraw from sex, or, whatever your option is from there. So she's obviously talking about it a little bit more from a contraceptive perspective, but she's got a podcast, and you talk about a load of different things, and unfortunately do share the horror stories behind birth control. That again, she's never, and this is a big thing I've taken on as well, is it's not telling people to not do it or shame people for doing it, or not, if they are taking any birth control, hormonal birth control. But it's, first of all, to genuinely ask the questions, they have had male birth control and they've stopped that during trials because they had acne and they had a few mood changes, and it's like, well, cancer is a symptom for ours. We've got strokes. There's big issues, and that was not cancelled, but the men's one was for safety reasons. So there's raising issues like that, but it's also raising issues about just we're kind of given it at such a young age, usually not as a contraceptive initially, because it's because you might have a heavy period, so it's like, oh, we'll regulate your period, which is initially, it is a lie. It doesn't do that. So I think it's a matter of like, yes, go on whatever you want, but actually it's making sure that the doctors or whoever's prescribing it to you gives you as much, you're going on it with full consent, what is happening, how it's working in your body, that if you're going on it because you've got bad period pains, while that might alleviate the pain, that is not going to fix whatever is actually going on. So it's been really nice being able to kind of over the last couple of years put all of that together, so use a lot of the work that I've kind of read a load of research papers with her, and then put those into captions, I suppose, on like social media to make it a bit more palatable for the average person who's just scrolling past it, but also then using that information at the UN and any of the events that we hold. And so it's been a bit of a kind of just doing lots of different jobs, and actually having them intersect is really interesting. So that's been kind of the last couple of years, is since leaving Cardiff, where I did my master's in international relations. So yeah, it's been interesting.
Yeah, it sounds like a very interesting mix. And I think it's so interesting how all of them interlinked in some kind of way. So in regards to being a UN Women delegate for the UK, could you tell us a bit about your role and how you advocate for women's health on a global scale?
So for context, with the UN Women delegate role for the UK, it's really cool. The UN Women UK organisation every year will kind of open up applications for people to apply to become a delegate. And initially, pre-COVID, they would have a really tiny amount of people they could give it to. The event they're giving it to is for the Commission on the Status of Women. They have that every year. It's literally like the COP, the environmental conference, but for women. It's a 2-week conference. It happens in New York every year in the UN building in New York. And each year they'll have a theme. So the UN Women's UK team, they will usually select people. And since COVID, because the CSW, so Commission on Status of Women, has gone online. Well, it's hybrid, so you can go in person. I've been a few times there, but you can do it virtually as well. It's meant that they've been able to I guess hire, in quotes, you volunteer for them, but bring in a load more people. So that was a really good cohort for us this year, and I hadn't heard of it before. So obviously I've already kind of got my foot in the door when I'm working through this NGO that I still do work with, but I wanted it from a different perspective. And also you do really notice the hierarchy when you're in the UN. So I thought actually it'd be really interesting to effectively be able to go to this CSW and hold an event, but not only say that I'm from this NGO, but I'm also being able to say, another NGO, which is the UN Women, is technically although it's the UN Women is a body within the UN, but UN Women UK is technically a charity. They're just a branch off of it. But being able to kind of say that, and it was just so interesting to see the difference of how people reacted. So anyway, so I kind of managed to play both cards, which was really cool. But it just also just allowed me, they made it a lot more accessible for me to have access to all the recordings. So even when I wasn't in New York for the whole 2 weeks, so I still was able to go to loads of them. And I think, this year's theme was women in innovation, and I think that it was just really eye-opening to see, the range in conversations you have from different countries in terms of their economic position, or actually what their major issue is, if it's climate change or if it's starvation or famine, or if it's a matter of like, we have no protection of women here. That's kind of where their direction of technology and innovation went. So obviously my focus is more on women's health. And I remember when we found out the theme was technology innovation last year, and I thought, oh gosh, how are we going to make this about periods? But so I've been able to kind of just have such a good network now from the other cohorts from the UN Women UK delegate who have joined me through that. So being able to just connect with women who are based in the UK, or at least have kind of used to be based in the UK and elsewhere, and just be able to connect with people at the UN that I'm not commending that actually they take me more seriously because I've been able to say that, but actually at least you can get the conversation going, and
Yeah.
then you actually tell them about the other work you're doing, which is, much more, not more impactful, but in the sense of I have more control over what's going on
Mm.
with the work at the Sikh Human Rights Group, rather than with the UN UK Women, which they're doing fantastic work, but again, I don't have a particularly big voice there.
Yeah, that's so interesting. So also, yeah, I mean, if I'm not mistaken, you're lobbying for menstrual health and rights in the UK, in the UN, sorry, which is an important topic for women all across the world. So menstrual health is also seen as quite a taboo topic and not discussed that much. What do you think the dangers are of keeping such important topics unspoken?
Yeah, I think it is such a fascinating fascinating and frustrating. I think that
Mhm.
the biggest thing whenever we talk about menstruation, and again, even context, so within the UN they've got they do 3 human rights councils every year, and that's about a month long in Geneva.
Mhm.
And last year in the June session, the United Nations Population Fund, so similar to like WHO, it's a branch within that. They focus on specific stuff, and they focus on sexual and reproductive health. So they're obviously the people to kind of go to around this topic. Hopefully the WHO will also get involved as well, but they're the ones who are really leading this. And basically last year, they their director in Geneva, Monica, is fantastic, and they managed to, whoever they needed to convince, but basically make a meeting that was called Menstrual Hygiene Management, Human Rights and Gender Equality.
Mhm.
And it was the first one, it was quite a small one. So there was only 2 NGOs that were allowed to sign up to speak. And again, there's no hierarchy. It's like Glastonbury tickets. You just have to sign up and hope for the best. And then there was about 15 countries that could speak on it. And then you were allowed about 12 countries if we had time to basically react to what we had already spoken about, if that makes sense. And yeah, we were fortunate. We were the first of the 2 NGOs that managed to speak. And that was kind of the point we were making in our statement was, and it wasn't the only thing, but even the language, we're talking about it at the UN, and that's fantastic, but we're talking about menstrual hygiene. And our point was menstrual hygiene is one bit of the entire conversation. Now, it is in certain countries, it's a bigger issue than it is in others. So it's
Mhm.
not to undermine it, and particularly access to water and sanitation is undeniably really, really important.
Mhm.
However, there are so many other avenues and kind of chapters to the menstruation book, as well as menopause and pre-menstruation, etc. So there's lots of stuff, but if you look at just menstruation, that kind of 40-year kind of space, there's the gender-based tax discrimination, the fact that menstrual products are most of the places taxed as luxury goods, same as anything that is a luxury item. And yet in a lot of countries where menstrual products are taxed, Viagra isn't taxed, hair loss cream isn't taxed. Both
Mhm.
are obviously Viagra used by men. Hair loss cream, 70% of the users are again male. And even Jaffa cakes, right? Like it's
Mhm.
it's wild in terms of what you're taxing. But again, it's not only this concept of you're just taxing these items that are not obvious. I mean, again, you don't need to reiterate they're obviously not luxury items. They genuinely are. And I don't think the others one should be taxed. Jaffa cakes, I don't mind, but the other two, I'm like, these are health items. Of course, they shouldn't be taxed.
Mhm.
How can you justify them being taxed where by the sounds of it, they are an option to use by
Mhm.
comparison to menstrual products that obviously everybody needs to use them. So
Mhm.
there was that point of it that is like this is contributing to the gender pay gap,
Yeah.
as well as the fact that we're basically in our heads being there like it's just not taken seriously as a
Mhm.
topic. But you've also got, the environmental impacts of menstrual products. You've also got the health implications, the toxic shock syndrome, which is just, I mean, again, such an unspoken thing and also misunderstood. We already get the blame because it's like, oh, but you kept your tampon in too long. And sometimes
Yeah.
that might be the case, right? That might be how it has happened.
Mhm.
But, there's a activist at the moment from the US who's been speaking about it for the last, I think probably 5-6 years since she lost both her legs because of toxic shock syndrome. And it was again, she was having heavy bleeds, so she was going through tampons quite quickly, which again is another issue that she obviously needed actually to address with someone. But it was a matter of, because there's bleach, there's dioxin, there's chlorine, there's so much, there's pesticide, there's so much kind of products on these, and like chemicals on these products, because it's cotton. And obviously, well, you're going to put fertilizer on this cotton and pesticide to make sure that it grows.
Yeah.
And to make sure it's the nice color, that it's just crazy. And it's just like, it's bad if it's on a pad, but if you're genuinely inserting it into you, it's just terrifying. And it's an issue anyway. This is like just again one example of being there, like, this is how broad the topic is, but we are talking about making sure people have access to products. And I'm like, that is so important, that make sure we've got access to products, but it is not going to fix everything. Even getting rid of the tampon tax is not going to fix everything, because we're seeing in countries, the UK as an example, where we got rid of it in 2001, companies have just basically upped their price pre-tax. So as a consumer, you're there like, nothing looks different, and then you're like, oh, well, it's inflation, you don't, and because also the gap in price is not that sufficient. It's more of a symbolic thing over anything else. Like for me, it's like a pound isn't, I know it will make a difference for other people, but for myself, I'm not like, well, it doesn't make much of a difference. But it's a symbolic thing of, yes, it still shouldn't be treated as a luxury item. But also that, there's then the direct and indirect implications of child marriage is linked to it. There is so many kind of different, I mean, the list is endless if you actually sit down and think about it, because it's how the female body is perceived. And I think, and again, it goes back to the birth control pill as well, and the conversations you have around that, and likewise with the tracking apps and how they're being misused and the data's being collected, particularly you see it in the US and stuff. So I think that, to go actually back to the question you just asked, the danger it has of it being this kind of really uncomfortable topic to discuss is because not only there's so many benefits of menstruation that we can go into like later that actually would be so impactful and so wonderful if we knew more about, but the bits that are being exploited, so not necessarily negative part because we're bleeding, I mean, again, it's not comfortable all the time, etc., but I don't want to shame that bit, because it's something that I'm like, it is what makes us, and it's also what has reproduced the entire planet, right? But I think that it's genuinely being used as a tool to discriminate women and girls. And you can't even talk about it. Like, we have these hygiene projects, and you're not only like at a child's level reiterating that it's dirty and they shouldn't be talking about it, you're stopping education. This is why endometriosis is 1 in 10 women have it, and yet it takes 8 to 12 years to diagnose. So I mean, the list is so endless of the negative impact it has just by not being able to speak about it in a comfortable place. And it's like, people don't feel comfortable asking for products, so they will bleed through, or they won't go to school. Again, you are then, particularly some countries worse than others, girls are genuinely not going to school. They are missing potentially 1 week of every single month. Well, it's like, of course they're not going to get the same opportunity as their male counterparts. They're missing half of their schooling. So yes, to answer your question, this is why, if there is a taboo and stigma attached to it and people aren't talking about it, then I think the implications, I mean, we've seen them because we're living through it, but I just think that this is why, everyone, I suppose, because the stigma comes from both ends, but it's a matter of being that, I know this needs to be addressed, but at least if it's on the international stage and using the language we should be rather than hygiene, if it's menstrual hygiene and health, just making sure that there's the health element to it, or menstrual rights, whatever you want to call it, but just making sure that it's actually being spoken about in a empowering way, but also an important way as well.
Yeah, it's so true. I think women miss out on a lot of education, and also in the workplace, I think it's a big thing that women are kind of torn between, do I take a day off or do I go into work in pain or uncomfortable? And it's not really taken into account. So do you think workplaces and education sites such as colleges, schools, and so on can do more to make menstruation and women's health less of a taboo topic and such an uncomfortable topic for some to talk about? And if so, what do you think they can do to make it a more inclusive environment for women?
Yeah, I think, again, I'll speak on it from a UK perspective, because I do know that obviously other countries that suggesting these options when it is so far removed from what they're actually living through at the moment, just it feels okay, very, very, white savior statement to be like, you should just do this. And it's like,
Yeah.
well, so from a UK's perspective, like 100%, I think that, one of the projects that we started about a year ago is we've been working with a company called Floosh. It's the UK, well, it's the world's first certified flushable menstrual pad. So it completely breaks down. There's no plastics in it. It's affordable, like it's a competitive rate. It's more expensive than, their competition, like Always, etc. But basically they realized that I think it was 1 in 3 menstruators were flushing their products down the toilet when they shouldn't be. So it's like, I mean, again, you look at the UK and the sewage system, we're one of 2 countries in the world that have privatized water. So again, another topic in its own in terms of our how valuable it is to make sure that we don't mess up our like Victorian pipes. But the point is that's what they saw. But also they have addressed the issue of, the making sure they don't use the word organic when only like 1% of your product's organic, right? But anyway, we've been working with them, and basically, not that again this shouldn't be on NGOs and companies like this to do this should be on kind of the government, but basically we've been working with schools within the UK, within Hungary, Ghana, Uganda, and India, and we've basically kind of put in this almost like a tax system where so private schools in the UK, for instance, all schools are happy to pay more because they have the disposable income to do so. They are paying a higher rate for these products to be provided for free in the bathroom. So obviously the people at the moment, I'm assuming it's just girl bathrooms and disabled bathrooms. Again, another kind of conversation where it can get better, but making sure they're free there and they're not behind the reception desk, which I remember when I was at school, that's what you had to do. You had to go to a reception desk and pick them up. But also then we're trying to so we've got a couple of Gurdwaras in Southall, are some of the bigger ones in the UK/Europe. And we're basically working with them to again provide these products. And this isn't on Gurdwaras to do it and nowhere else, but our point is every public place should be providing these products for free. Workplaces, and also they should be the best quality products. Again, not the really expensive ones, but it should be products like that, because again, the more they have, the more companies like that will exist. But anyway, and our point is just, if you go to a bathroom, it is 100% prepared for someone who doesn't menstruate, but it is 50% prepared for someone who does. Like toilet paper is just obviously you'd be horrified if your workplace just didn't provide toilet paper. Granted, yes, we all buy toilet paper for our own home, and you're not hiking up the prices for that either. There's no like pink tax on it or whatever. But right, that's our point. And I think that again, this is where it kind of it seems as like once the products are there, that's it. And it's there like, no, because there's so much more. I think we've seen Spain, and I know there are other countries in, I think it's Asia, South Korea, I think have done it, but basically where they've given paid period pain leave. And I love the concept of this. I think where I am slightly reluctant for the UK government to just do this is, that's what a big issue is, that I do think that it would contribute to the gender pay gap. I do think that there would be some workplaces, you're not obviously in an interview going to ask, myself compared to my potential male competition interviewee, you're not going to ask me, do you have bad periods? Are you going to have to take 2 days out every month, right? You're not going to do that. So if it was a matter of like, there's a risk, I'd like to think like, this is a really tiny amount of people who would do it, but the chances are that still exists. And I couldn't reassure them to be there, like in my interview, by the way, I don't have bad periods, so I won't be, right? I'm not going to do that. But I think the actual bigger issue, while that will have an impact, is at that point, what we're doing is normalizing period pain. Period pain should be so severe that you can't work. Now, I think working from home has done so much for people who menstruate / mothers and stuff, like families in general, but particularly, women, if you kind of look at it from people who menstruate. I think that actually, first of all, if you look at your cycle, right, this again is how we see it, is like your cycle is, you might bleed for 5 days and then the rest is like completely normal, and that is so normal for a person who menstruates to think as well. But actually your hormone levels are changing the entire time. We are living in a world that is literally built for someone, well, for men, for people who have a 24-hour cycle, right? No, it would be impossible for us to change it around. But in an ideal
Yeah.
world, I would probably work for 3 weeks and then take an entire week off pre-menstrual / when I'm menstruating, when my hormone levels are really low, when I'm just so much more tired and I need more sleep. I have to maybe eat more because I'm burning more calories because I'm bleeding. But
Mhm.
actually, if I could have my meetings, or if I could talk at the UN when my estrogen level is really high, I would, right?
Yeah.
Now, that is really hard to do, but with this more flexible working, if we encourage, again, this is on the individual if they want to, but if you track your
Mhm.
cycle, you would be able to actually potentially manipulate your work day a bit better. So you're there like, actually, do you know what? When I'm, during my ovulation phase, I might work longer hours, but
Mhm.
kind of just cut my hours down a little bit more if I'm able to, obviously work is work, it might get busier when
Mhm.
I'm maybe feeling a little bit more tired. So I think that's the possibility of it. So I think what
Yeah.
workplaces need to do is actually, and they are start doing it with menopause, making sure that
Mhm.
they've got support for people who are going through menopause, so they understand it better. If they need to talk to anyone, etc., maybe take time off, which I
Yeah.
think is fantastic. But I think what actually we need to do is just, again, menstrual health. I think that if there is someone either who is trained in the workplace, or better yet, you've kind of got this, insurance, or a link to an online portal that teaches you about it and
Mhm.
makes you realize, oh yeah, do you know what? I'm in so much pain that I do need to take those 2 days or 3 days that,
Yeah.
might be proposed. Makes you maybe realize that's not normal then. I should not be in that much pain.
Mhm.
There is probably something else going on. Maybe it's a hormone imbalance, or maybe it is PCOS or fibroids or endometriosis. There are so, and
Mhm.
that's, they're all so common. I think that's the
Yeah.
frustrating bit. And I think that then universities, again, I suppose universities are again strange because it's in terms of lecturers, people are all over the place. So
Mhm.
again, that was one thing that actually, if we started at school and we made sure the education around menstruation is not just like a biology lesson where it's there like, once you are ovulating at this stage, if you have sex, you could get pregnant. Is there
Yeah.
like, actually, do you know what? 8-year-old, first of all, they should be teaching it at primary school, because nowadays young children, as in 8 years old, are starting menstruation
Mhm.
because for lots of reasons. But again, obesity is on the rise in children, so it means they have more estrogen, so their body thinks they're
Yeah.
older than they are, right? So they're
Mhm.
starting periods younger than what was typical. So that's another thing we've spoken to the Minister of Education about in the UK,
Mhm.
saying that we need to have more education, but predominantly make sure access is there.
Mhm.
And their pushback was like, well, you don't need them in primary school. No one's starting their period in primary school. So they're like, yes, they are.
Yeah.
They're terrified, because it's one
Mm.
thing if you start your period, it's always, mixed emotions. You might feel scary or
Yeah.
whatever. If you genuinely started bleeding from your body when you're 8 years old and you've had no education on it,
Mm.
that would be terrifying. Like, there's genuinely stories of a girl in Kenya who had committed suicide because she thought she was dying. She thought, well, and I mean, again, that's a very extreme example, but it's an example of where that is lack of education. So I
Yeah.
think if we just actually had such a better education around it,
Mm.
um, and that would be for all students to understand it, because again, like, since me being tracking my menstruation better, I think that my boyfriend's a lot better at knowing, like, oh, okay,
Yeah.
this is where you're maybe like, let's not have an argument around it.
Yeah, that's so interesting. There's so many, it has so many effects that, you wouldn't think of. But like
Mm.
you said, there are so many kind of counter, almost a butterfly effect of if we don't do this concerning menstrual health or educating in terms of menstrual health, there are so many different effects you have. So now shifting more towards your human rights advocacy. So human rights are a fundamental aspect of gender equality. How does your work as a human rights advocate intersect with your kind of feminist advocacy and your role as a UN Women delegate? Do you see these two complementing each other, and how so?
Yeah, I feel like it's one of those, again, anyone who would like, particularly when you see the pay of like potentially what work you do, people are like, why do you do it? Like, you work a lot more hours, you
Mm-hmm.
can't switch off because you're constantly either staying up to date with what's in the news, or you're attending meetings at really random times because of time differences, etc.
Mm-hmm.
I think that, like, for me, it was never really an option to do a job that I could probably switch off from. You know what I mean? Like, you take holiday and you're like, I don't think about this for 2 weeks if
Yeah.
I'm on holiday, and I will not open my laptop. Now, that's probably a little bit of a healthier way to do it to an extent, and maybe
Mm-hmm.
safer financially. But I think that it becomes a personality, and not in the sense of you become like this incredible person. I am genuinely learning so much every single time, and there is a selfish element to it that actually, yeah, maybe I just want to learn more about myself
Yeah.
slash my place in the world, and actually, you know, the privileges I have had growing up, etc., by comparison to so many others. But I think that it does become, yeah, this just who you are in terms of just being really curious. I think that that's definitely what I've noticed, is that, you know, they have, it just blends into one in terms of, I think, you know, I've got such a push on the more, yeah, gender role, particularly obviously mental health, etc. So I do find that when we're then talking about something within work that, again, might be farmers' protests, might be debt in Africa, it might be I don't know, genocide, like something, you know, completely different. Again, a massive topic.
Mm-hmm.
I do always have this like, oh, I wonder how like menstruation impacts this. And so I think, but I do think that's important, because any issue you look at, we went to COP27 last year and they had a gender day. And one of the conversations where they were talking about is that women and girls need access to finances. So obviously, particularly in these African and Asian and South American countries that are feeling the absolute worst of climate change, they are so women and girls are 14 times more likely to die because of climate change disasters compared to their male and boy counterparts, right, which is shocking. So with the statistics, it's actually, and also they're typically, particularly in the countries it's happening in, their gender, you know, they play more to the gender roles and they will be more at home. So actually it makes more sense. They have an idea of what the community needs. It makes more sense they have access to the money that, you know, obviously with COP, it's a lot of the time it's, you know, countries like the UK giving loads of money over to these other countries, right, like reparations.
Yeah.
But anyway, so I think that the point I made was, you know, this is all well and good. You want women and girls to be at the decision making table and you want them to have access to the finances. But
Mm-hmm.
how do you expect them to go to work and school if they don't have access to menstrual products? So I do think that it was an element of a, like, it is so intersectional that I think there is a need to basically have a specialized part. You know, I've got one colleague who's focusing a little bit more on AI, and I think that
Mm-hmm.
he will look at things from a really different perspective. So I think that, I'm not sure if I've answered your question, but I think, yeah, it's almost this kind of, you know, mess of stuff that you just keep adding to. It's almost like Play-Doh or a thing of like glue tack, and you just keep sticking stuff on. And I think the point is, it only makes you understand things so much better, and it makes you question other things. So you think, oh, I understood it from one perspective, but now I'm looking at it with both. You're kind of in a different thing. So I think that that's definitely how I've learned it over the last couple of years.
Yeah, that's so interesting. So, after advocating for a couple of years, do you feel hopeful for the future of gender equality and advancement of women's health? And what do you kind of envision for the future of gender equality and women's health as a whole?
I think I do feel hopeful, because I think that you don't have to look that long ago where you notice the
Mhm.
difference. You know, you notice when the women got the vote, you notice all these different, you know, massive milestones in terms of the rights for women and girls, and anyone else on the gender spectrum, right? Like the conversation around trans rights, and this is definitely not something I'm an expert on at all, but
Mhm.
while it's not to say there weren't people advocating for it decades ago, there very much was. But I mean, it's a snowball effect, right? And obviously it's now a controversial topic for the Labour Party in the UK to talk about.
Mhm.
Now, it's a shame it's a controversial topic, but the fact that it's a conversation of the
Mhm.
Tories and the Labour Party is quite impactful, I think. So I think that I am hopeful in the sense of, I'm like, we are having to speed up so much. But, and again, I don't understand AI enough, but I think that there are these, you know, impulses of, whether it's massive climate change or again AI or whatever, where I'm like, this is where the hegemony will come back in, and actually anyone who's further away from basically white cisgender male middle class person is just gonna feel the impact a lot more. I mean, we see that with climate change and stuff like that. We, you know, there's that kind of issue with AI, is that naturally we're kind of tailoring it to certain people, so a lot of people are just going completely unnoticed. So I think there are elements like that where it will never be over. And I can't remember I think it's something like 300 years is actually when we're expected to see gender equality if we keep the pace we're going. So it is statistics like that you think, okay, so we have a long way to go.
Yeah.
But I think that in my immediate circle, which I have to always bring it back to, is that, you know, again, I'm obviously doing a lot more work in mental health, and I
Mhm.
probably talk about it way too much for some people, but actually now people get it, and they also
Yeah.
don't feel like, they will ask, and again, particularly from, I mean, all of my, you know, female friends know so much more, and that's not just because of me, but because we've had a conversation. So they just know
Mhm.
more about their body because they're being more in tune with it, or they're starting to question birth control, etc. And again, not all just drop it and be like, I'm not going on it, but actually just start to be like, is, and that goes for any drug, but you know, particularly that, like, is it that good, you know, just start
Yeah.
to be a bit curious. But I think, yeah, you see it with like your kind of male friends where there's some that you think you would hate this conversation, and maybe behind their backs they laugh about it or something like that, but I mean, like, you do genuinely engage. And I remember I caught up with a load of friends a couple of weeks ago that I hadn't seen in a year, and a lot of, again, the guys were just asking quite specific stuff about my work, and I was like,
Mhm.
that's so nice that you have actually kind of
Yeah.
followed that, whether it's through social media and stuff, but you're actually also feel comfortable enough to talk to me about it, because
Mhm.
again, some of you might hate the idea that you're having to bring up periods. So I think that's what's the reassuring bit, is when you look at your immediate circle and you think, okay, this is maybe the smaller impact I've had. But
Mhm.
I mean, the UN is one of those that, you know, it's ironic, you say you do something at the UN, you make a statement at the UN, and it's almost, you rely on it to kind of get outreach virtually so that people like yourself, you know, we connect like that, rather than you're asking these countries effectively to be there, like, you know, it'd be great if you got rid of the tampon tax, and also, you
Yeah.
know, put in regulations to protect, you know, people's rights with the products, or better educate, whatever you're asking, right? And it's there, like, the point is this delegate now has to go to their government, and then it's a whole thing within that government, you know what I mean? It's like, hey, the process is so slow,
Mhm.
unless it's a disaster, in which case that's when the UN are like, right, this is what we need to do. And obviously that is great, and you do need that democratic kind of point to it, but I think if you always look at the bigger picture, you just be depressed, you know. I
Yeah.
think, yeah,
Yeah.
like, I will not see change, whereas if you look smaller, you look at your family, or you look at your friends, or even people who don't like you but they still know about it now, you're there like,
Mhm.
hey, this is where, like, there are change. And obviously if it's just more people who are doing that work in lots of different areas, then,
Mhm.
you know, it's like a ripple effect, you know, they will talk to their friend about it, and it will get less and less, but the point is more and more people will know about it. That's kind of how I get by day to day.
No, that's so true. It is hard looking at the big picture, but I think if we take it step by step, it'll work sooner or later. There's an effect. But thank you so much for your time. I appreciate all the opinions you had and your experience. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It was great to speak with you.